Luka, what is good, my man? How are you doing?
What is going on? Happy well, it's Monday morning here. Still letting the caffeine trickle through my veins, but feeling great. Feeling great. Happy to be on the show.
Yeah, it's what for you, right around 9 in the morning?
Yeah, it's like 9:20 a.m. So I've been
Dude,
up
well,
for
I
a
appreciate
while. When you have an
you've been up for a
eight-month-old. So
while. What time did you get up
yeah,
with the baby?
it's been like a bit of a roller coaster because the last 8 weeks have been the first 6 months I was expecting like hardship. The heart like I was like mentally prepared for like so little sleep, and it was actually better. And then you kind of start feeling good, like, oh yeah, this is smooth. And then about 8 weeks ago it was 4:30, 4:45, and
Yeah,
then of course like 4 to 5 times waking up in the middle of the night. So that's what it's been lately, and I hope we're kind of moving out of that phase. But caffeine is
yeah.
my friend right now for sure.
The wonderful sleep regressions, bro.
Oh yeah. And
Yeah,
the tea coming in, all that good stuff, so
yeah, yeah, man. That's awesome, dude. I know with a baby, it's not easy, but caffeine's definitely my best friend too. Let's start off, man. I really want to get to know you a little bit more on a personal level, Luca, because obviously you're somebody who's extremely well respected in our space. You give talks, you travel, you've mentored a bunch of cool people in the space. Cody, who's a mutual friend of ours. But I'm always really curious to understand where people come from. One thing that I talk a lot about often in my content and my podcast is I don't consider myself a quote unquote ridiculously successful person by any means, but relative to my upbringing, I consider myself relatively successful, not just professionally, but with relationships and all that good stuff. So I'm always really curious to learn about people's backgrounds. Where did you start? How did you even get into this whole fitness thing in the first place?
oof. I'm gonna bullet point it, but not keep it so bullet pointed that it's robotic, because this story
Take us back.
can definitely get long. But I mean, I was born in Slovenia, but back then it was still I was born in '81, so it was still Yugoslavia, right before the war happened in '91. So that was my upbringing, and then we left to go to London when I was 7. And like all of this has, I think, kind of important context for what happens later. I think so. From 7 to 11, I lived in London, and it was one of those scenarios where I legit thought we were going on vacation, and then we just went to live there because my dad got a job, and he dropped me off in like regular English school where I basically all I knew was like my name is Luca and a couple other things. He's like, "Hey, I'll pick you up at 3:30." And so a lot of things in my life were kind of like adapting to different environments, places, people. And we ended up moving back when I was 11. My dad stayed in London during that economical time in Yugoslavia. It was got rough, so he lost his job for the company, Slovenian company. We came back, and he stayed there. So it's just my mom raising me and my two brothers from kind of 11 on. My dad would be back and forth, but like every month he'd be like 1 month in London, about 5 to 7 days at home, and that was like for 20 years. And I say that to say this, so when I'm 13, my mom opens up a gym, and I didn't actually think that this was a big factor until like later on in life I looked back, right? So she'd work at the bank half the day, and she had this little gym. Um, in Slovenia, you'd have these physical education buildings, and at the top was like a 2,000 square foot spot. All the regular stuff, techno gym equipment to racks and benches and all that. And so for me, like I was very into basketball, from the time I was about 9 years old, but scrawny. When people see me, they're not like that guy's for sure a hooper. That's you don't. I mean, I'm 6 foot, but in Slovenia, like point guards are 6'5". So,
Yeah.
um, but that was my first kind of experience with lifting, and like because I was a scrawny kid, at 13 I started going to the gym to hang out, to see my mom some because she was working a lot, and I was kind of definitely fortunate because there was one of the top powerlifters in the country at his weight class trained there just because it was proximal to where he lived, like across the street. And he taught me how to, bench, squat, deadlift, like good form, progressive overload. He was just kind of like giving me, I would say, schooling me on the basic stuff. And the other thing was at the bottom of that building, crazy story, but there was two guys. It was a little gymnastics room, but the two guys that trained were both Olympians and like world champions. One was Elias Pagan, who was the straddle like best in the world for I don't know how many years, right? And they would come up. and train there a bit and teach me all types of, body weight stuff and training. I mean, they were just, I mean, elite, right? So I had this, environment where right from the get go, I'm getting taught things by legendary people,
Yeah, that's cool.
and which I didn't even know how good it was at that point in time, right? But what happened is like, man, I put on muscle, like I got faster, I could jump higher and touch the backboard, and I connected the strength training, performance training to improvements in my confidence in life and sport. So that was a big catalyst that I wouldn't even know of. I also like at 13, 14 started like reading everything that you can imagine: T Nation, Elite FTS, Zatursky, Verkhoshansky, like anything I could get my hands on about training. But I never thought at that point in time, like, hey, I'm going to be a strength coach. That wasn't, it was like, I'm going to be a pro basketball player. And so, like this is like, I'm just diving into this stuff. So that was an important factor. Now, at the same time, I was also a big knucklehead kid, like in my teens, I got in a lot of trouble, organized crime, it was basically, I mean, I was somewhat a bit uncontrollable, and because it was just my mom, it was tough for her to regulate like me when what I was doing. And that led to, because I started playing, kind of pro basketball at around 16, 17 years old. Like
Okay.
basically in Europe, you play for the junior teams of the pro team. That's how it works, right? And if you're good enough, like, hey, you're gonna play this weekend for the pro team, then you already get paid some and stuff like that. But when I was like 17, I got in a lot of trouble, and it was, my coach was instrumental in kind of pointing out that like this, this path of the way that I'm behaving, selling drugs and things like that, we're gonna, not lead to the right direction. And at that same year, we as a team, the Slovenian team, went to America to play in Eastern Invitational Basketball Academy, which is basically, the best high school kids from America in Trenton, New Jersey. And it was an experience for us, right? It was meant to be like, hey, let's see how good we match up. Let's have this experience. And when I was there, first of all, like I had a blast. I played it really well, and I was on the team that I was on. My coach was this guy Wayne Jones, and he was like, hey man, like, do you ever thought about playing college hoops? And I was like, in my mind, I'm like, well, not really. Like, I'm already playing some pro. Like, I make good money because I sell drugs, and it was kind of, I mean, I was unaware of how, stupid the things I was doing were. But I connected really well with him. I played really well. And he was like, hey, maybe you should come back next year and think about college and this, that, the other. And I didn't think too much about it, but he kept in touch with me. And that whole next year, the trouble I got into kind of got worse. There was some like life kind of alternating situations that made me go like, oh shit, what now? And so I essentially played that year. I go back to Denver where Wayne lived and train with him for like 2, 3 weeks. Then we go to two camps, Eastern Invitational camps, and I do really well there. Now by the way, I have no idea how college basketball works, right? Meaning, when do you get a scholarship? When do they run out? Like none of that stuff.
Okay.
So I crush it, and schools like Quinnipiac, Delaware State, Western Michigan are like, man, we really like you. I think you could play, but you have to walk on year one because it's August. Like we don't have any scholarships for this coming year, and I'm like, okay, cool. Tell me more about this, and then you realize that every one of those schools is like 40, 50 grand a year.
Yeah.
I'm talking to my dad. My dad, like midway through the sentence, like, nope, like not happening. And but that year there was a guy that like, because they switched coaches on the team, and he was like, hey man, look, you're really good. I think that you could play right away. I used to play and coach at a school called Broome, so it's a community college in upstate New York. They don't have full rides, but you can get some money, and like we could make it happen. And I remember coming home, it was like August 5th or something like that, and just was like, this is what I'm going to do. And I pulled the trigger, and I went to, like kind of just speed it up to college, 2 years upstate New York, got a full ride in Southern Virginia, and then from there went to play pro overseas for about 3 years. And the whole time, the whole underlying story from there is like, I am at this point in time always into training, like so hardcore into training. I think it was my competitive advantage was my genetics aren't great. I'm not that tall, but I'm lifting, I'm studying plyometrics and speed training, reading Charlie Francis's Speed Trap and everything about it. And So there was a natural, once I was kind of done with my basketball career, which was really difficult, right? Making that decision because you have like this massive crisis of identity of who am I if I'm not, what have I been doing for the last
Yeah.
14, 15 years and dedicating my life to this. But that's when like, coaching really saved me in a sense because if anybody's read the book, So Good They Can't Ignore You from Cal Newport, excellent read, right? But that whole, it talks about career capital, right? When you do a lot of deliberate practice, you build up career capital. And I think that from age 13, I was building up a lot of career capital in training. I was studying books, training. Like another really fortunate thing for me when I was 16 that I didn't mention is my basketball coach knew this guy's name was Srđan Đorđević. Hard name to say, but he was the most elite kind of track and field speed coach in that part of the world. So he trained Marilyn Adi the last 6 years of her career. Who's have I don't know how many gold Olympic medals. He trained Brigitte Bukovic, who was the '92 Barcelona Olympics silver medalist in hurdles. So we're talking about elite, right? And my coach was like, "Hey man, I got this kid. Like he just wants to jump higher, run faster. He'll do anything. Man, would you have him come to the training sessions?" And he was like, yeah, tell him to come. Thinking I would not show up at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning before school, not knowing I'm a nutcase. So I would show up and he was annoyed at first. And then he kind of got to liking me because I was like I mean, hardworking was like, that's my advantage, right?
Yeah.
And so for like a year and a half, 2 years, I'm training with like Brigitte Bukovic. I mean, like Olympic medalist, learning about twitchiness, learning about sled sprinting and overspeed work. I mean, you name it. Like I was around it, and like that was explained to me. So this was all deliberate practice for me, leading up to when I actually was like, "Hey, I'm gonna be a coach. Like this is what I'm gonna do." And I made that decision. My last pro year of playing basketball. It's pro sports isn't always what you think it's gonna be. Meaning, like I play for Division I team and I'm not getting paid. And you're like, well, how's that happening? Because sometimes what will happen is, teams are promised money from sponsors, they don't get it, and then they kind of like pull you along, like we're gonna get the next payment soon, and then we'll pay you type of thing, and you're doing 2-a-days. And in between, I started coaching, and basically my brother had some clients, same thing, side hustle. It was like, man, I can't take them anymore, but like, can you take these 3 guys, and I'm like, sure. And I coached them and I had a lot of fun coaching them, right? Like, and they went to my brother and said, hey, like your brother's got something. He's got a knack for this, like motivation, like he just is really good at it. And so in that year, between, we would train people in this place called Tivoli, which is like the woods. We'd bring kettlebells. We were huge on bells back then, especially because they were, mobile. And then at this Sokol gym, which was just like a smaller big box gym in Slovenia, and I had like a pretty man like busy roster. So I'm get up in the morning, I train, from like 11 to like 4, I'm coaching clients, and then at 6, I'm back at like basketball practice. So for those 2-a-days, a lot of times, again, I'm not getting a paycheck in between. I'm making minimal money training people, but I'm fucking loving it. Like it's I'm getting back a lot of like that feeling of you're helping somebody achieve something, was fulfilling me. And that was like a really big trigger for me. I was like, man, I used to do a lot of dumb stuff and bad stuff in my life. And like here I'm helping people and I'm almost, getting like this dopamine hit, like this, addictive thing from it.
Yeah.
And that was one of those things where I was like, all right, this is the way that I'm going to go. Now, it's important to say this is 2005, 2000, yeah, it's 2004. Yeah, 2005, I think. So in Slovenia, there's not one really successful personal trainer. Like you don't look at anybody and go like, oh, look at that guy, like crushing it, status, making money. This is what he does. Like I'm looking to. It didn't exist. It was either a side hustle or you were a strength coach and you made okay money, right? Like if that.
Yeah.
I had to look to the U.S. I was even doing back then. I mean, I don't know if people remember, but Pat Rigsby, Trainers Inner Circle. I was already paying for like education and knowledge and mentoring because I was like, well, there's people there crushing it, and that's how I started learning. And the way I came to the States was that I got I got married young, my college sweetheart, so which was a tough thing to do, play pro basketball overseas and long distance. So I ended up deciding to go to the states, and she was from Seattle, and so that's how I we started a gym there 20 years ago now, which is the most successful training gym in Slovenia still to this day. And came here, started from scratch, had to went to LA Fitness, did 100-hour weeks, Vision Quest, and then 2008, in October of 2008, I opened up a little garage gym that was 900 square feet. That was basically the first kind of rendition of Vigor Ground. And so that's been, going 17 and a half years or so ago. And we went from 900 square feet to 4,700 square feet to me buying a building that's 12,000 square feet where the gym is in now. And we've got, 7 tenants like physical therapy, fit bar, DEXA fit, all this stuff. And I mean, that's like the short of it, but kind of the timeline of what happened. And I mean, I wouldn't change anything for the world, even the hardest things about it, because the story matters, and the experience of going through that kind of that journey is made me who I am today, and I think it's beneficial. While you're going through the hard shit, you obviously
Yeah.
you think differently about it, uh, but looking back now, you're like, yeah, I'm glad all those things happened.
Dude, that's an awesome story, man. Hell of an origin story. That's dope. I think you and I have some commonalities for sure, which actually is something I've been thinking about that I want to ask. Like, probably totally unrelated, but where do you feel like your rebellious nature came from as a kid?
Whew, I probably I mean, I think one is like being the youngest, right, of the brothers for sure. I know I did a lot of therapy, and again, there's so many parts to this story, but
Sure.
I got married very young. I got divorced in my very early 30s. A lot of stupid things that I did, a lot of things that I brought along with me that I wasn't aware of, and then I went into quite a bit of therapy. Went into Wake Up Warrior, did a lot of things to work on myself, and that's been a kind of common theme throughout my life. But the reason I bring this up is because when I went through therapy, there was a looking back. I mean, being first of all brought up in socialism, having two brothers, being the youngest, and then also, at 11, when my dad stayed in London and we came back, there was a lot of me being like, I don't feel seen. It's like I got to be somebody. Like I have to show you, and that was like honestly for the next 20 years of my life. That was, which again can be beneficial when you're driving
Yeah.
to for achievement, right? And to kind of say the Tony Robbins part of it, where it's like achievement without fulfillment is failure. I learned that the hard way quite a few times, but I think that's the thing that I always have to be careful of, even today. Where I'm quite aware of it, but it can sneak up on you that you're doing something, to prove a thing to people that maybe don't care. And it's just like this. I think it can be good fuel at the right time, but I don't think it can be the main fuel that drives your life, because it can really burn you up. And again, I've burned up a couple of times, meaning internally from that kind of energy of like, I'm going to prove you wrong, chip on my shoulder all the time. Again, I don't want to say that like because some people be like, oh, that's not healthy. I actually think that at times it can be the best thing for you,
Yeah.
but if it becomes the main thing that fuels the engine of your life, I think that can be dangerous. So, and I speak from experience to where I hit a wall and I'm like, all right, like I need help. I need therapy. I need to figure this out and change things around. And I did. But like I mentor a lot of not just coaches but younger people, and it's like these are the conversations, where
Yeah.
I'll help them trip over their own truth to figure out that like, hey, maybe this is working right now, but like, this won't work forever. And like, don't make all the mistakes I made. If I made 1,000 mistakes, like maybe you can only make 250. Like if I can help you make 250, man, I'm doing my job, right?
No, I appreciate you sharing that, man. Because very similarly, I was a fairly rebellious kid for slightly different reasons. For me, there was just a lot of like chaos and instability at home, and I just acted like an idiot essentially. But do you? What I was going to ask is, do you feel like some of that like rebellious nature kind of goes hand in hand with aspects of your personality of like being a hard achiever and being hardworking and being almost like obsessed with a particular thing, right? I tend to be the type of person where, and I don't know if you relate to this, Luca, but if I'm not interested in something, like you cannot motivate me. Dude, I have a PhD and I failed so many classes just because I did not care about the subject. But if I care about something even a little bit, man, I get hyper
Oh, game
obsessed.
over. Yes, that's me. I don't know, like the question of nature nurture.
Sure.
I think it's probably both. That like there's a book called Driven that talks about that you have the entrepreneurial gene, right? And I will say, like, if you ask people that have known me since I was a kid, like I was selling counterfeit jeans when I was 11 years old. I was trying to, like, I was always like, we would be in a family, vacation with some friends, and I'm trying to like, I'm trying to do business with other kids. You know what I mean? Hey,
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
give me that, I'll give you that. It's like I'm just always trying to manhandle stuff. So I think there's some probably nature there. And that book talks about how like the 4 to 5% of people that are entrepreneurs, most have ADHD. By the way, most of my life, I would tell you, I would never bring it up, and then in the last 5 years, including my partner Waitia, who we have a kid together with, she's like, you have ADHD, like hardcore ADHD. I'm like, what are you talking about? And of course I do, probably, right? It because and like what you said, but that ADHD, if I lock in on something,
Yeah.
I am like I'm an absolute animal. Like I will just go to the ends of the earth to obsessively, become great at that thing. So again, and I think that you gotta each person you gotta kind of manage your downsides, if that makes sense. Like your strengths. Bring your weaknesses up to where they don't, kind of pull you down like deeper than they need to be. So protect your downside and then work on your upside. And I think that I've, learned to do that. Is like, hey, here's my strengths. Like, let me do as much of those things that I'm the best at. Let me work on my weaknesses to where they don't, kind of mess up my life. And I think that's a good way to go because everybody's got their own stuff that makes them special, right? Like everybody's a one of one, and I think there's a lot of comparisons to. I did that a lot where like, oh man, that person's like this, and you focus on another person's strengths rather than your own. And it's like, well, what makes you unique is that you have these life experiences and these genetic things and these strengths, and like if you play into those, your life will be certainly better and you'll be more successful with them.
Yeah, dude, the ADHD is a superpower.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm happy.
absolutely.
Yeah, I was saying I'm happy you brought that up, man. I don't have many like very young listeners because the content that I typically talk about when it comes to like health and regulation of like blood sugar and cardiovascular health and stuff like that, like younger crowds don't care about that. But I think this message is so important because I think I'll speak for myself. When I was a kid, I used to act out like crazy in school. I was always class clown. I would do homework and not turn it in because I would lose it. Um, when I was in elementary school, they made me like see like the counselor for the school or the therapist or whatnot. They wanted to encourage my mom to put me on specific medications. Thankfully, my mom said no. And when I was a kid, like it wasn't as popular, I feel like, as it is now. But man, like being a kid is difficult, especially when you're not a kid who kind of just like falls into the crowd and like behaves, right?
Yeah,
And you realize, at least for me as an adult, so many of those traits have served me so well as an adult that I wouldn't trade it for anything.
yeah, and I think that like people would say that I'm like the most stubborn person that they've ever known. Um, Again, could that could be a bad thing, but also, man, like for in a world where most people conform,
Yeah.
to like this is what you should be, this is who you should be, this is what you should do. Being yourself and going after the thing that doesn't make sense to a lot of people is essentially an act of rebellion to a degree, right? Like, but think about this. So I back then, imagine now, like, first of all, I'm going to be a pro athlete, and most of the time parents are kind of like, okay, like you should be an architect, that type of shit, right? So I do that, I go through that, in many ways, I was successful because I made it way further than anybody could ever imagine, right? But if you looked at my, bank account, it'd be like I don't have anything, to show for it. Um, and then you're really like at kind of this weird space because like you're kind of starting everything over, and then you're starting everything over in a career that where I'm coming from that country, you can't even look at it and go like, this is something,
Yeah.
and in the U.S., let's be real, like in 2006, I mean, there are successful personal trainers. Don't get me wrong, but
Sure.
think about what the industry is today versus back then,
Yeah.
right? And I remember I'm working at LA Fitness, and my father-in-law is like, "Hey, I got an interview for you at Boeing." It's like, and I speak 5 languages. Like my resume is great. And by the way, this is his guy, so like the chances of me getting this job are very high, right? And it says I don't know, $70,000+ a year job in 2006, right? And benefits, all that stuff, right? Like the problem that now I'm making like 2 grand a month, working like crazy hours at LA Fitness, and I'm sitting there, I'm going like, this sounds really good, but like I love this. I can see a future. I know I'll make this happen. I don't know how long it'll take. I'll do whatever it takes. There, you get in and I'm gonna work hard, but it's not what I want to do. And you could get comfortable. And then you go from 70 to 80 to 90 to 100 to, and then it's like you could be stuck in that comfortable life. And I'm like, no. And it's like, it was mind boggling to people, right? When I told them this, like, what are you doing? By the way, I'm married, right? So like there's bills to pay. Like but my rebelliousness from a standpoint of like, I know like, Brad Stolberg calls this like in career, right? Like, um, fit, grit, quit, right? Like if you're doing something and you give it your all and it's like, it's not the thing, quit. But if you're like, this is the thing for me, and it's a fit, right? Then you got to have a lot of grit. That's when grit comes in, and grit's going to be a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of consistency. And to me, it was like, without knowing that terminology, it was like, this is the fit. And I know that like, ooh, this sounds good money wise, but like, man, this is what I want to do. And the thing is like, you need to be stubborn because if you got a hard time paying the bills, and boy oh boy did we have a hard time paying the bills, right? Like that you go like, no, I'm not going to take this much, like 3-4 times more money and benefits, right? And just keep going after this thing that I really like is a fit for me. And I'm obviously I'm very very glad that I did, because quite a few people, sadly majority of the people that I know, like they do work and it's like, hey, I don't have meaning in my work. I don't have engagement in my work. I don't have fulfillment
Yeah.
in my work. And it's like, hey, maybe the money side is good, but to me it's like, look, you're going to spend half of your life working. I mean,
Yeah.
more or less, right? Like if we calculate it, right? If you're an entrepreneur, more. But so it's like, man, to for me, like that idea of like half of your life you're going to be like not really engaged with, right? It's not going to give you something back. You have some meaning. That for me was really hard to wrap my head around, and thankfully I didn't, right? Um, so I think that's where it can really really be a strength. But I mean, look, I think every trait, it's kind of like drugs, right? Like the right dose can heal you, right? The wrong dose can kill you. So I think it's equal here. It's like, I had this conversation with my partner Martia, and it was like, narcissism. And she's like, man, you have some narcissistic traits. And at the beginning when she would say that stuff, I'd get like really upset. And then when you kind of calm down, it's like, well, yeah, I do. Like everybody does. It's a scale. It's a sliding scale. And the truth is, the entrepreneurs probably, not probably, actually, research shows this. It's a little higher, right? And I
Sure.
even I even said it where I'm like, look, like a lot of my life has been me being my own biggest like cheerleader because nobody else like believed that I could do things, right? And you kind of sometimes almost become a little bit delusional about what you can achieve, but it's like it's helpful, right? So again, now if you dial that up too high, that's a problem. You know what I mean? Like it's same thing. By the way, same thing with empathy. Same thing with anything. It's like
Yeah.
it's this ebb and flow of having those traits. And a great. By the way, I know I'm throwing out a lot of books, so I apologize for the Amazon accounts if you're going to keep buying those suckers. But
You're good, bro.
but Uh, the Dark Side of the Light Chasers from Debbie Ford. She has so that's an incredible book. She's got another book called Why Good People Do Bad Things. And I love this so much. I ended up going, doing a course and becoming a shadow coach and stuff because I was just like so interested in this, right? Like how we suppress, as kids, we're suppressed certain emotions, right? Even things like jealousy, envy, whatever it may be, and that's actually not healthy. And it talks about kind of like when you're a child, imagine this beautiful castle with all these rooms, and each room is an emotion, right? And you're about to go to your cousin's house, and you're like, hey, we're gonna go to our cousin's house. And you're like, I don't want to go, and the mom is like, straighten up your face, don't show those emotions, don't right, like, and then you're taught like not to show a certain emotion, like that you're upset or whatever else. And it's the equivalent when that gets kind of hampered, that you know a certain room in the castle gets locked up, that emotion gets locked up. The problem with that is that, like, it means you suppress. When you suppress, nothing good happens. And I am a great example of this in my life, right? Like, and it can be, again, like even things like hatred and jealousy. When people are like, "Whoa, how does hatred have a how is that a good emotion?" And it's like, well, honestly, you hating certain things in your life like makes you not do those things, right? Like it has, jealousy has a place. Being a bitch has a place. Like maybe sometimes being a bitch saved your life or something like that. So, and again, if you want to dive deeper into it, please read the book, and I promise you it'll make sense that, like, human beings, we're all of those emotions, right? And again, like if you suppress anything, like if you never get too sad, you'll never really feel full joy. It's how it works. And I do, and some people might go like, hold up, aren't you like the training performance guy and training elite athletes and stuff? I'm like, well, one thing that I've recognized, and I've coached for 21 years, right, is that, like, you have to, everybody understands building physical strength. Like, we go to the gym, we apply strain, progressive overload, our body adapts. But there's, that's the physical weight room, great, but then there's also the mental weight room, and then there's also the emotional weight room. And I think that a lot of people, will practice the physical strength training, but don't practice the mental strength training and emotional strength training. And by the way, I was one of those people that emotional strength training was like out the window, and you grow up in socialism, and a lot of times it's like pucker up, do the thing, shut the hell up, like, and it's, again, has its place for being a good thing, and it has its place for being a really bad thing because you're suppressing all these emotions. And like I had to go through a lot of learning and training and I would say therapy to figure some of those things out. But they're important because, again, like if you don't work on those things and deal with those things, it's gonna come and bite you in the ass, right? So hopefully that gives some insight, because I do think it's an important topic.
Yeah. No, for those of you guys listening, I promise we're about to talk about training. But I wanted to interject here, man, because, like, gosh, dude, you're bringing up so many things that I just resonate with so much. So I'm first generation Cuban American, right? First in my family born in the U.S. So very similar background in terms of like cultural upbringing. And for me, dude, my whole life, pretty much growing up, like talking about your feelings or expressing your feelings was not a thing at all. And to take that a step further, um, my mom, my mom definitely has certain mental health issues that are just undiagnosed. But I bring that up because I grew up in a household with a single mom where if I even slightly, and I mean slightly, went against her perspective or what she thought was right, or I tried to express my emotions that slightly contradicted her way of viewing or seeing things, it was just bad. We'll leave it at that. So my whole life, I've suppressed my emotions. And now as an adult, I talk to my wife about this all the time. It's probably one of the areas in my life that I have the hardest time really even understanding. Like, um, oftentimes my wife will express she feels, and I think women in general potentially are just a little bit better about like understanding their emotions, but she feels this or she feels that, or, and I'm like, uh, so my aunt actually just passed away, but when I found out she was in the hospital, she had a heart attack. I was wrestling with like, how do I even feel? I don't really know. Like, Am I sad? Am I angry? Should I go down because I actually, in my heart, feel like I should? Or do I just feel like it's because I'll be judged if I don't? And it's hard to wrestle with those things. And then sometimes from day to day, I just find myself in like these weird emotional funks where I wake up super angry and I don't know why. And I think a lot of it stems from that. I haven't done nearly as much work as you have. So potentially I should. But I think you learn a lot of those things. I mean, specifically getting married, right? And like now living with a partner, them having to understand you, learning how to communicate those things, learning how to potentially support and handle their feelings as well. It's a tough thing to do when you haven't really done that your entire life.
No, and I would say that like my partner has been a great mirror, and to be honest, like too, like, and it's a never ending. Here's, it's a never ending kind of process of improvement. That's the other thing too. I read it. I'm a voracious reader. Like I read it a ton, right? And I think sometimes, she'll say stuff where I'm like, "You're not listening to me. Like I don't give a shit about your books and all the stuff that you read." And it's like it's true because I'm like, well, I know all these things,
Yeah.
and but then I have to like sit back and go like, oh, but I'm not hearing what she's saying, right? Like it really is. So people are teachers, but we have to have that awareness. And I think, look, my favorite analogy of like just life is it's like it's like a video game, and I don't play video games anymore, but I used to a lot in college and stuff. And you think about how most people approach life. A challenge in life is like a boss in a video game, right? And you get to the boss most of the time. Like you play the video game, guess what? You're gonna get beat by the boss like a whole bunch of times before you figure it out, right? But people don't stop playing the game, right? It's the challenge is part of the thing that draws you in, and then you overcome the boss, and guess what? Like I don't know, you get a power pack, you get an extra heart, you go on another level, right? And you keep doing that. Well, life is like this video game with unlimited bosses. That's basically what it is. And but unfortunately, people get to the challenge, and it's like, oh shit, challenge, complacency. Like let me go back to the other level where I can handle it, right? But you don't grow. So what we're talking about here, by the way, is the challenge. It might be in a different area than what you're used to. Like challenging what, man, I got this sticking point at 405 on a squat, but like I'm going to figure out all these things. What's my weak training? How can I improve my skill and technique? Do I need to change my volume and frequency of training? Like you're figuring it out, right? Well, shit, it's the same thing with other aspects of your life, right? Your recovery, your emotional health. Like, hey, are you a shitty listener? And so because of that, like, there's constant problems. Those are all bosses in your life that you have to struggle with and get to the next level. But I'll tell you what, like I was with my nephew years ago. We're home for Christmas, and he's playing like one of the Call of Duty, games and stuff, and I'm playing with him, and he goes like, "Oh man, like uncle, like let's go over here because this is where all the action is. Like that's where all the fighting is, right?" And he gets super excited, and I'm like, "How interesting is that, right?" Like, because afterwards I was like, "Hey, like if this game was just you pressing the button, moving forward, and pressing the green button, and you just beat every level," he's like, "That would absolutely suck."
Yeah.
Like, yeah, like wouldn't life suck if you were just moving through life? Like we would not have any honestly like fulfillment with achieving things without struggle. But it's important for sometimes to zoom away when you get really frustrated with something, right? Like where you don't deal with emotions well, or this, that, and the other. Because to me, I'm like, now I just visualize like, oh man, that's the boss, man. Like I'm struggling beating this boss, but like let's make sure that I keep working and beat this boss versus go back to the level below me and feel good about myself because I'm not progressing, not leveling up, right? Like, and I just like analogies because it helps me, I would say deal with things in life because I'm like, oh, Luka, hold up, man. Like, same thing in business, right? You run into something and you're like, fuck, like what's going on? And
Yeah.
I'm like, man, this is a tough boss. This is a higher level. Like, you gotta do more things that you haven't done. Like, you got to figure this out. And it helps me sit with it and go like, okay, I can sit in this uncomfortable spot and do the work to get to the next level. Like that's how it works. So I think that this has been helpful for my clients when I talk about these things. And I'm like, once I tell them this analogy, I'm like, oh man, seems like you're facing a challenging boss. Hey, let's make sure we don't go down on one level to feel good about ourselves, right? Like how like let's beat this boss and go to the next level. And people are like, okay, all right, so
No, that's such a good
anything I
analogy.
can do to help people with coaching, man, like
Yeah, no, I think that's a great analogy, dude. And I think it really depicts what you just said at the end, let's make sure we don't go down a level just to feel good about ourselves. To transition here to talk about like the actual struggles that people have with health and fitness, I think that is what it is in many ways, right? I talk often about, people do all these on the nutrition side of things, these fad diets, whether it's keto, whether it's this, whether it's that. And for a lot of people, it just feels really unsustainable and restrictive because it goes completely against like their particular lifestyle and or preferences, and it creates a lot of friction. But oftentimes, I also see a lot of people just like hit a particular challenge, get frustrated, and give up. And it's because giving up and going back to their previous habits and behaviors feels a little bit more comfortable, right? Because they've been in that situation for so long that learning how to navigate those situations and overcome those challenges feels incredibly difficult, because in many ways developing those skills is incredibly difficult, right? I wanted to ask you this, Luka, when it comes to training specifically. Um, a lot of the people that listen to me and tune into the podcast are individuals who are really passionate about health and fitness, really want to be in the best shape possible, but they're also real people, right? They have careers, they have a family, and being able to juggle all that alongside their health and fitness, especially if they're passionate about education, which anybody who tends to listen to podcasts and stuff like that they also feel confused because it seems like there are these million and one things you really need to do and juggle correctly at the same time to be able to optimize your health and fitness. What I wanted to ask, and I know this is a very general question, we'll start here from a training perspective, thinking about the outcomes of strength, health, muscle mass, mobility. What do you feel like are some of the most important high leverage principles that these individuals can focus on? And I ask that to start the conversation by eliminating the noise, right? Like what's potentially not necessary that you hear people talk about often, and what should we be focusing on? And then we can dive deeper into those topics.
I'll actually have a note here because this plays really well into this. And this, by the way, this I think is one of the most important things to buy into, which is the consistency that you can do stuff with, right? Because we live in a quick fix, like gimmick oriented society. There's just so much bombardment with like all these, cool things you can do fast, right? Everybody wants faster progress, and social media and the way we consume information has changed our perception of time and how long things should take. Let me repeat that. It's basically changed our perception of how long things should take, right? Because you can have almost anything delivered the same day. You can have an entire essay written on AI, right? And training hasn't escaped this. Like so, but no method bypasses time or consistency. Every physical quality develops through exposure to the right stimulus, followed by recovery and ultimately adaptation. Essentially, like I tell athletes and clients to say stimulus, recovery, adaptation, and then stabilization. Okay, then repeat. And so what that means is that like we have like you have to do something for a long enough period of time, and that stabilization part is really important. Because hey, could we get a crazy, and I've trained athletes that have short windows of time to get a result, movie stars, blah, 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 right? And it's like, I got to be ready for this role. Cool. But in real life, can you then stabilize and maintain that? So I always tell, like, forget about 8 weeks, 12 weeks, like in the next year. Because the truth is, like, what can you do in the next year? So it helps you, by the way, it brings the stress down of this like really short term goal. I think it was Dr. John Berardi that was kind of like, gave me this insight, like probably 15 to 20 years ago. It's like, people overestimate what they can do in the short term, but they drastically underestimate what they can do in the long term. Right. So that is a lesson. And I prefer a longer runway with clients. Like, let me explain what that means. If you're not doing anything right now in a sense of like organized training, if you started doing 2 full body strength sessions a week, and 1 cardio session a week, it'd be incredible. Incredible. Because very likely for most people, they'd be like, well, I can definitely do this long term. Right. And by the way, if you did that for 6 months, notice I didn't say 8 weeks, I said 6 months. In 6 months, if you improved your nutrition some and started doing that, you'd be way fitter, way stronger. You'd put on some muscle, you'd be healthier. Like your life would improve pretty dramatically in 6 months. Right. And then in that time, that would become like a very normal thing for you to do. And then you go, well, you know what? What if I had another strength session? What if I had another conditioning? And over the course of a year, you would get to 3 times a week full body strength and like one high intensity conditioning session and one lower, or maybe two, maybe, like you'd kind of continue to add to this runway, this longer runway. And folks have a much better success rate with that because it's doable, right? It's doable. And now let me talk about the inverse that most people do. Oh shit, I got to do something. It's January. It's about to be summer, whatever. I download this ebook, and it's 4 days a week of strength training, and it's 3 days a week of conditioning, and it's carb cycling, and it's like, imagine that's the equivalent of you coming to me and going, hey, listen, I got to learn code, and you're like, dude, all right, so here's what we're gonna do, and you throw like the gauntlet at me, and I'm just like, what the, like, I gotta study this shit all day, like what, I got a job and kids, I can't do it, I'm gonna fall off the wagon, right? And now look, everybody has a different entry point, so individualization matters, obviously, but this is kind of like the thing that I tend to see most of the time is that people feel like they got to do like way more than is necessary. Now, don't get me wrong. Like when you train, like you have to train hard. But even, by the way, beginners, 50% of one rep max creates adaptations, right? So the cool thing about beginners is almost anything will create adaptation, right? And obviously, the more that you progress, the more that you build your physical abilities, the harder it gets, which is why, the top power lifter in the world spends 1 year trying to add 5 pounds, right? A beginner, I mean, we're probably adding 10 pounds per week for quite a bit, like on a trap bar or something like that, right? You're going to have way bigger, people say that 1% better every day. Well, guess what? At the beginning, it's like more than 1% better every day, But
Yeah.
once you're elite, it's like 0 point, you can't even look at that anymore. You just get curious about how to improve, right? So I think that part, you might have heard it before if you're listening to this and like, oh, I've heard this before. Cool. But do you practice it? Because if it becomes a roller coaster, and if you're like, I went 4 days a week and this, and then I fell off and did it, and you get what's called the rest pause mentality, right? I will go hard when life is easier, and when it gets harder, I'm gonna stop. Like, not even like dial it down, just stop, right? Because I hear this all the time. Well, Luka, I'll get started when things get smoother. I said, well, when do things get smoother? Well, probably before, probably. Okay. And then the question becomes like, do you think that in the future in your life, there will be a time again when things get harder? Yes, of course. Yeah, I agree, because life gets hard and sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's hard. It's just constantly doing that, right? Like, would it not be smart and beneficial that you learn how to do things when things are hard, to build skill sets when things are hard, meaning eating, in alignment with your goals when things are hard, exercising when things are hard. Now, you may dial it down. Like, I'm a perfect example of this. I'll tell you the truth. I was like, hey, I was a 15, 16 years, four time a week lifter, conjugate, lower, upper, right? Love that model. I wanted to do that when the baby came. No bueno. It's not happening. I can't recover from this. I'm about to be 45, so that was another factor. So I go to 3 full body days. Okay, which has worked out way better for me. But then I'm also like, I'm going to do 3 full body days and 3 days of conditioning, high, medium, low. In the last 8.5 months since we've had Aria, I get one conditioning session a week on average, 1.5 maybe, right? So my point being is I had to dial it down, and it's okay, right? Like you dial things down, and things. She gets a little bit older, things get a little bit smoother. Maybe get a 16-week period where I can dial it up a little bit. But here's the thing: I don't go to zero. If the dial is 0 to 10, right? You got more stress, you got kids, like your nutrition is going to dial down to maybe a 4 or 5 instead of a 9, right? Your training is going to dial out down to maybe a 6 or 7, because training, it really helps you mentally, right? And you do these dials, but you never stop. And I think that most people, when they begin, they turn the dial up way too high. And then there's this like, holy shit, I can't do this. This is, to get in shape takes too much, and I will fail. I'm not meant for this. When the truth is like, you just didn't start at the right entry point for you. And there's zero judgment on what that entry point is, right? Because I'll get a former pro athlete that, has a different mindset, and maybe they can start a little bit higher caliber, maybe, right? So it's different for everybody. You just can't judge yourself and compare yourself to others. But longer runways are better, right? Longer runways are better in most scenarios.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that, for sure. And like, it is funny the analogy you brought up of like learning how to code and then throwing everything at somebody in a day, right? Because it's like usually people get motivated around particular events, whether it's summer, whether it's New Year, and it's almost difficult to tell that person like, listen, if you want to do this the right way, you're not going to get in the shape that you want to get into for the event that you're talking about, right? But Luca, what about for the person who is already training pretty consistently, potentially not seeing the progress that they would like to see? What do you think are, because here's the thing, I feel like so many people are confused about what workout split do I follow? What exercises do I do? What exercises do I not do? How do I balance strength training with cardio? How much is too much cardio? Maybe let's start talking about practical advice for the type of person we're talking about here, the busy professional, has kids, is juggling a demanding family and career life, but wants to really get in great shape. What do you think are some of the most, this is a cookie cutter question, but most optimal training splits? I know that's not even really a thing because it depends on the underlying principles, right? But even from a training split perspective and from a exercise selection perspective as well, to be able to like squeeze the most the smallest amount of time.
Okay, that's a great question. This can really kind of go deep, right? And but let's create some rules. Okay, for most people, I think busy professionals like 3 days of full, 3 days a week of full body strength training makes the most sense. Now, like I could give you so many different like templates that like work. You could go, lower upper full, right? That's a pretty good one too. But
Mhm.
again, 80 to 90% of the time, I'm going to go with full body, and that works best. And the question of why is we have enough research behind it, and then like there's the research side, but then there's like I've been training people for 21 years side. The research side, hey, if we have more frequency works better, right? So if I have the same body parts and I have frequency of 2 to 3 days a week of hitting those body parts, I'm going to develop better strength and muscle mass than if I have, once a week, hardcore, more volume. And again, this has been done over and over again. So there's that part, but also I've just seen this in, I mean, we have coached at this gym, 4,000 plus people, at our Slovenian gym, 8,000. So we're at 12,000 people in person, not to, even touch on the online stuff. So that's worked best. Okay. So if I had to pick one, I'd pick that one. Then when you kind of break down, I would say, I literally, when you go through the steps, to me, it's like I'm going to find out about the person, then we're going to pick essentially a template. And remember, the template also has to fit their life. I can't tell you how many people like legitimately can't do 3 days a week.
Yeah.
Nurses, so on, like crazy schedule, whatever it may be, right? And I've got like a lot of clients I train that are like 2 times a week, semi-private strength training clients, and they do about 2 times a week strength, and they do 2 times a week conditioning. I call it two plus two for life. And man, they crush it. They still see progress. They've built muscle. Like if I show you their before and after pictures, you'd be like, how many days a week do they train? Like six, and be like, no, four, two strength, two, and they got their nutrition and lifestyle down in, right? So my point being is like, you fit the program to the person, but I would still go 3 days a week, full body strength training. And then when you go, okay, well, how do we like break all this stuff down? Have you ever heard of the R7 philosophy that kind of Mike Robertson I will say I've borrowed it from Mike Robertson and use it a lot. Like R7 is an easy way to remember how every training session should have these aspects in it. R1 is release. That's your soft tissue work, your foam rolling, your lacrosse balls, whatever else, right? R2 is reset. Reset is think of like positional breathing. I'm not gonna get too like geeky about this, and I really can, but imagine like getting your joints into better positions and getting your nervous system dialed down, right? Like most people when they come to train, either a long day of work, maybe they didn't sleep enough, like they're usually pretty stressed out. Their nervous system is like pretty up there, right? So part of like just doing box breathing for 2 minutes, not a lot, right? Or they're in a couch stretch position doing, 4 second exhalation, 4 second inhalation. So we're getting the nervous system a little more calmed down. We're getting tissues to tune down a little bit and like, reset per se. R3 is readiness. That's your warm ups, dynamic warm ups. Your Spider Man lunge, your squat to stand, your high knees, like all this stuff to get your body core temperature up, your movements, like you're moving up for the specific, if I'm doing a squat, for example, as the first big exercise, I'm going to open up my hips. I'm going to get my thoracic, a spine opened up. I'm going to get some ankle dorsiflexion going. So that's your R3 readiness. And then R4 is reactive. And I think this is where, you may have heard me talk about athlete for life stuff. Like in every program of every person, we put in something that's plyometric, power, speed. It's the number one thing people lose with age. It's not strength. It's not muscle mass. It's power. Actually, rotational power. If you want to get really specific with it, right? So, like, even if a person doesn't come in and say, "Hey, Luka, like, I want to be really fast," I'm still going to put things in there that are regressed and specific to them, and then create some power. And maybe it's like one or two exercises, one lower body exercise, like a box jump, one upper, like a med ball wall throw, right? Like 2 to 3 sets of 5 reps. Okay. Also, what it does, it gets that nervous system riled up a little bit, gets it ready. Then we're going to go to R5, which is, so R4 is reactive, R5 is resistance. So that's our strength training, right? Meaning strength and resistance training. And somebody will go like, well, hold up, what's the difference? Well, to me, strength training is get stronger. Resistance training is like build muscle, you could go like build strength endurance,
Sure.
build tissue, build, right? Like you have a lot of other things that can fall under that compartment. R6 is resilience, that's your cardio, and R7 is recovery, so like a cool down. Now, somebody might be listening going like, dude, that's a lot of shit. No, let's break it down, right? So after you do some soft tissue work, by the way, for most people, 5 minutes, right? One reset. Like we'll give one reset drill, and then we'll get moving for about 8 minutes in the readiness part. And like I like to connect things a lot, right? So people kind of start sweating when they're doing their warm-ups. At the end, we even, by the way, even with elder people, like 50s, 60s, 70s, like we'll do things like running drills, just regress, skips, high knees. It might just be a march. So because it's good for movement for them, it's kind of like a low level plyometric. And
Hmm.
guess what? They'll definitely be warmed up, right? Then we go into the power plyo stuff. And again, this is like you do 5 box jumps, you walk to the wall, you throw the shit out of a ball against the wall. By the way, I don't care who it is, everybody loves doing that. Like,
It's fun.
yeah, it's fun. It's like you see people start, smiling, and it's bringing back kind of like that physical education aspect for them. So we'll do that, and then we'll go into the resistance training. Now, this is where I do want to kind of insert the question of exercise selection, right?
Hmm.
So let's say this day, we're going to do as our big like lower body lift is a squat. I think that like this whole like idea of there's something mandatory that you have to do. I think movement patterns are mandatory. I don't think exercise is mandatory. Like a back squat is not mandatory, right? Like, and if we look at a squat, what are all the, and some of these are obviously based on do we have these machines, but let's just go down the list of all the different squats that we could do, by the way. Okay. Goblet squat, everybody knows, double kettlebell squat, hanging dumbbells squat with a wedge, for example, right? Belt squat, barbell back squat, barbell front squat, safety bar squat, Zercher squat, hack squat, pendulum squat, which I love, is one of my favorite squats. Right? And like we could go on like safety squat to box. I mean, landmine squat. You could say so many different things.
Yeah.
Now, if my thing was like, but I want to build strength, I'm probably going to pick a specific squat for this person. And again, maybe they're a very beginner person, and a goblet squat will do just fine.
Yeah.
We're going to do, we want to make sure their movement is good, and we're going to do 8 reps. And again, they're a beginner, they're going to adapt, everything's going to work. If they're pretty beat up, but they do have some experience, like, hey, man, I've been training for 10 years. I can't do a back squat. I can't do this squat. I can't do that squat. Like, hey, can you do a pendulum squat? We do a pendulum squat. They're like, this feels amazing. Great. We're doing 3 sets of 5. And you're going to push on those 3 sets of 5 because, so picking the exercise and like, again, if everything is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. So it's like you got to have that toolbox and understand like which tools to choose for this person. But then to me, it's like most of the time there's going to be a main strength exercise, and then the other exercises are going to be, supplemental hypertrophy, so muscle, and assistance kind of exercises that build up the weak links. But let's take an example. Like let's keep going with this and say, okay, well, we got a pendulum squat, right? As exercise A, exercise B, because I tend to do supersets because people are short on time, right? So we're gonna have a pendulum squat. And then we're going to have, for example, like a T-bar row for like 6 to 8 reps. Then we're going to have a dumbbell RDL and a dumbbell bench press, or maybe a push-up variation. And then the last part is like weak links. I usually do a tricep, right? So it'll be what's weak for most people. Well, it could be quads, it could be glutes, but let's say it's a hip thrust, a face pull for the upper back, and then a stir the ball with a Swiss ball, right? So that's core. And then if you got time, which in that program you probably would have, we're going to do high intensity conditioning. Now, here's why. Okay, if you look, people will say stuff like optimal this, optimal that. If you're very limited on time, what makes sense? Do all the hard stuff on one day, right? Like Charlie Francis would call this the high-low model, right? Like if you think about the intensity of a training day, imagine that red is like the hardest, either highest volume, highest intensity. Green is basically medium, right? And then blue is like a recovery day. So that could be aerobic stuff, mobility drills, whatever it may be, right? The mistake a lot of people make is that like one day they'll do really hard strength training and the next day they'll do really high intensity conditioning. Well, that's 2 red days. Not a good setup, right? If I look at the week, it's got to either be like, green, red, blue, or it's like red, blue, break, red, blue, right? Like, so this is a part of the mistake of a lot of people make is they do too much hard training back to back. They never recover from it. And it just doesn't make sense because again, like, if I look at 4 spokes of the wheel that help move your body transformation forward, it's training, nutrition, recovery, mindset. Like those are the 4 blocks that kind of spin the wheel, right? And a lot of times we get folks that have been training for a long time and they're like, hey, I'm stuck. They come to us and I look at their training week and it's like, oh, like we're going to train less. They freak out, like, no, like I'm training a lot and I'm not getting results. And I'm like, yeah, you're doing 5 days a week of strength training. I'm going to go to 3. It's going to be like Monday, Thursday, Saturday, right? And it's like first they argue with me, and then 3 months later they have the best results they've ever had, right? Because the thing is, you have to be able to the stimulus you create, you have to be able to recover from it. If you don't, you're going to run into a wall. Your performance is not going to be great because fatigue masks fitness. And for everybody, you got to find that sweet spot, right? For me, sleeping less as a young dad, am I going to have to dial down? Of course, I'm going to have to dial down, right?
Yeah.
So that would be an example of like one of those days. Now, like here's a caveat. Somebody's going to say like, well, what makes it different from, the red day versus the green day? Well, let me tell you this. If you do a 4 sets of 5 heavy trap bar deadlift, okay, as your main lift, tell me how much that takes out of you, like when you wake up the next day versus doing 4 sets of heavy bench press the next day.
Night and day difference.
Exactly, right? So upper body, you can recover, like it doesn't involve as much muscle. It doesn't like get the CNS as fatigued. So a green day could be like, we said, hey, first day we got a squat as our main lift, right? Like superset with a pull. Well, but if for example, if we have the main lift on like it was a Monday and then a Wednesday, it's like bench press, right, as the big lift, like that would be a green just from that. And then the volume might be a little bit lower, right? So that would be the difference. Just that.
Luka, when you say green, it's essentially intermediate intensity.
Medium. Yeah. So think like hard, medium, light, right? To
Gotcha.
keep it very, very simple, right? And so you can, by the way, you can probably get away with, that's the other thing too. You can look a lot of stuff. Like I train a lot of elite athletes and, off season, like they sleep and they train. That's it. Like, and by the way, even some of those guys, I can't do 4 days a week of strength because it doesn't make the most sense because
Yeah.
they got skill work and this, that, and the other, right? So now imagine like you're a father of, 2, you work 8 to 10 hours a day, you got all these responsibilities and, and you're crushing your, every time you go into the gym, like you're annihilating yourself. It'll work for a little bit, but then it won't. Right. And this is where kind of like it is a science and art. I'm gonna be honest with you. Like it really is because you have to be able to look at all these facts. Like, people have different genetics. Like I handle volume very well. I can tell you that. Like, some of it again, nature nurture. If somebody tries to do the volume thing with me, they're going to get pummeled. And so it's just you have to, have the science part of it, but then also assess and go like, man, this person doesn't manage that very well. And I will say that from my experience in over 20 years of coaching, when people come to us that already have trained for many years, okay, and they're like, hey, I want to get better results. I've got some results, but like they say, you guys are the best. I can tell you right off the bat what I see almost 100% of the time. Okay. Intensity is not high enough. So this is how we get results. Meaning, like, if I take somebody through, and I won't name the client, but I'll tell you a client that came to us, trained for many years, and we do like tests, and we're like, all right, we're going to work up to a 3 rep, trap bar deadlift, and they get up to 215. Okay, been training for years, and I'm like, all right, you think you can do more? I don't know. This feels kind of heavy to me. It's like, well, when you go to the gym, what do you do? It's like, I get to here, and then I don't push beyond that. Right? And I didn't say anything. I'm like, okay, cool. And I jotted it down. We go do dumbbell bench press, and I'm like, pick a weight you think you can do for 10 reps. They pick a weight, right? They go to 10. Now, I'm looking at this and I'm going, there's no involuntary slowdown at rep 10. I'm
Yeah, it's a
like,
warm up.
this guy can do another 20, 15. I don't know, right? So then I'm like, hey, look, how about this? This next set, I'm going to give you a couple tips, and I'm going to push you and challenge you to get literally get to failure, or close to it. I'll tell you when to stop. And that 10 rep turns to 23, right?
Yeah.
So he had 13 reps left in the tank. By the way, this is a person that has been training, right? It's not a complete new person. And so, what tends to happen is that, and by the way, we don't turn the dial from a 3 to a 10, right?
Yeah.
But next week when they come in, I put a little bit more weight on the bar. I coach and cue. We do a really good dynamic warm up, the art of coaching. And it's like, literally 16 weeks later, this 215-pound guy is like at 365 for 4, you know what I mean? And then like a year later, he's at 425 for a double. And he's up 18 pounds with like 1% up in body fat, right? And it's so, and by the way, and he's like, man, these sessions take less time than what I was doing at the gym. Because what happens, right? Like you lift, you talk a little bit, you come back to the weight, you lift. There's no structure, there's no push. And so most of the time, like we're gonna push the intensity and just take out junk volume, right? Like, because then I'm like, hey, what were you doing? Well, I came back the next day and did a bunch of arms and shoulders, and then they're constantly coming in, working, but there's no kind of method to the madness, and the intensity is too low. There's not enough stress to create the adaptations. Now, as a beginner, yes, there are, because if they did that as a beginner, they did get results, and it's like, oh, cool, this is great. But then you don't, and then I think that's where it comes into play. Like if you don't have more than an hour to train, you don't have more than an hour to train. I think for most people, you really don't need more than that.
Yeah.
Right? R1, R2, and R3, that's about 10 minutes to 12 minutes. Then you got about another 15 minutes to do your power work, your strength stuff. And like for most people, you're going to be good. Now, listen, if you come in and say, I want to be the most jacked individual of all time, like I want to get to 240 and I'm like 190 right now. Yeah, it's probably going to take more. It's probably going to take longer, right? There's a requirement for every goal that you have. But for the majority of people to get a pretty, like over a course of years, you could get absolutely mind-boggling results with that structure, right? Again, I don't say this because it's like I read all the research, but that's irrelevant as far as like this is what we've been doing and testing out, and like we kind of see it and understand it, and it works. There's a lot of caveats here as far as like one thing that I do like to share with people is this. So that R7, imagine that if that's a piece of a pie, right? And that whole piece of a pie is your training session, Joey. And it's like right now you're like, I'm in a phase, Luka, where I want to build more muscle.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So what we're gonna do is, your warm up is going to be your warm up.
Mm-hmm.
Then we're going to put a little bit of explosive stuff in there, ramp up the nervous system. But then R5 is going to be a big chunk of that piece of the pie, right? Maybe we'll have some conditioning there at the end, depending on what your goals are, right? But that's going to be a piece of the pie. Now, a beginner that honestly is very, very immobile, I mean, has very unfit.
Yeah.
R3, which is your dynamic warm up, may be 40% of that pie. Because have you ever seen somebody that's really unfit and a beginner do a squat to stand?
Yeah. Work capacity is so low.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a like by the warm up exercise number 4, they're like, whoa, what a great workout. And it's like, well, we're actually warming up, right? And so it's like that piece of the pie is going to look very different. Now, I'll take another example. Offensive linemen that I trained a bunch of, I would say, NFL guys. and other pro sports as well, and they can trap our deadlift, let's say 750. That person does not need to get stronger. We just need to maintain that, right? But it's like, you know what? They're like, hey, I got a tough time accelerating. Like those first 2, 3 steps for to block, and especially like in a lateral way too. Okay, so we got to work on rate of force development. They're not, that we need to make them more twitchy. So a bigger piece of the pie is going to be that R4, right? Which is the reactive part of it. So strength and muscle building maybe, they're gonna be there, but that's gonna be maybe 20% enough to maintain while we develop these other properties. And maybe again, like, hey, I get gassed after like 15 snaps, but I play 60. Okay, well, we're gonna need to work on your specific conditioning. So I like this piece of the pie analogy because I've yet to have a client that's a general population client come in and say, all I want is to be jacked out of my mind. I don't care
Yeah.
about my cardio. I don't care about my mobility. I don't care about being strong. Like most people are like, hybrid athletes in a sense, right? Like, hey man, I want to be fit. I play, paddleball. Okay, cool. Tell me a little bit more about that. Yeah, I play once a week in a tournament. Well, how long are the games? Okay, cool. All right. What else? Well, I would like to put on about 5, 6 pounds of muscle without putting on any fat. Got it. Right. Hey, my hips are tight as hell, man. Every time I do deadlifts and squats, my little back hurts. Right. So now we're going working through that R7 for that person, and it's like we're creating this piece of the pie analogy on what to work on, and then we're organizing it in the right way throughout the days, right? Like, and by the way, some of the days have all those components in it in an organized way, but usually high low to me, or high medium low means, where again, like your blue days, your low days are usually aerobic work, and stuff like mobility training, maybe some weak links, and you organize it in a way that fits for that person. And again, like we can dive, I said, as deep as you want into this, because I've always been a fan of concurrent training, the conjugate model, which we usually will kind of have like a sub max effort day. I I don't say max effort because for most clients they're not going to do a true one
Sure.
RM. Like they're going to do a 3 to 6 series somewhere. So there's a sub max effort day, and in the conjugate model, it's like you have lower and upper. But for the purposes of full body, we'd have a submax effort day for full body. Then you'd have a repetition effort day. So think like that's more of a bodybuilding type day, right? And then you'd have a dynamic effort day, which is like your more explosive power. Now,
Yeah.
here's the kicker. It doesn't mean that each of those days is purely just that. It means that the main emphasis for those days, one day, it's more of that more maximal strength. One day is like, hey, we're building like muscle, right? That's our kind of main thing. And then one day, we're focusing on more dynamic. So rate of force development, plyometrics, speed. And again, those just take up a bigger piece of the pie. There's still other stuff in there, but that's kind of like the main premise. And so my athlete for life model, that's literally what it is. It's, the 3 day a week athlete for life model is exactly that. And, I did that with myself and with a lot of people for a long time before it was like, whoa, this is really good, because when I stopped playing pro sports, I never wanted to lose the athleticism, right? It was a thing that was near and dear to my heart, and I've always trained people that way. And in the last couple of years, that's really exploded as a thing. It's become a trend, which by the way, I'm all for it. I love when good trends kind of explode, and hopefully it stays, right? That people are like, hey, how can we train in a smart way to be more athletic? Because there's such a carryover to life and health and longevity, that just by the way, anybody that goes like, well, what do you mean? Look at the statistics of people that are over the age of 55, 60 that fall. Okay, 1 out of 3 break their hip. They're immobile for, I think it's like 8 months. They put on 20 pounds. Mortality rate goes up. It's nuts, right? So it's very. By the way, 1 out of 3. What is tripping and falling? It's reactivity. It's power.
Yeah.
It's speed. It's agility. That's literally what it is, right? People lose it, and that's why you look somebody that does that, and unfortunately, I've seen a lot of people do it. Right? It's like stiffness, like doop, oh, boom, like versus like, oh shit, I got it, right? And this idea that you cannot, maintain and develop those abilities when you're like 40, 50, 60 is nuts. Look up the research.
Yeah.
All those, when you look at the research and it says we're losing this much strength, this much muscle, this much speed, this much power when we hit these ages, it is based on averages. And averages do not continue to do those things. By the way, do you know that after the age of, I think it's like 30, most people will never sprint again?
Yeah, wild.
Again, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah,
That's right. It's crazy. So to me, it's like, well, if even if you tell me, hey, I want to build as much muscle as possible, I'm still going to sneak in things, whether it be a contrast training, again, whether it be like at the end of warm-ups, we do dynamic stuff. And I've never had, even the person that's like, I want to be jacked on my mind, nobody's going like, what is this shit in the programming? They'll be like, hey, I love this fast stuff, man. I feel better when I go lift. Like it's, it's so it's just it's just taking the science and the research and then putting it together in programs that make sense for what people want to achieve. And some of it is like, put in the medicine with the smoothie, right? Like it's like the kids, like, hey, you put the spinach in the smoothie so you don't taste it. Well, that's basically what I do.
yeah. No, dude, so many great points, and we'll definitely have to do a part two on this because, like, even just personally, I love nerding out about this stuff and learning more from people like yourself and seeing how people have different training models and philosophies as well. I was listening a little bit to, I don't think it was the latest podcast you did, but the one before that with Cody. And you guys kept bringing up like, hey guys, these are just ways of doing it, but it's really the principles that matter, and like it could be done a million different ways. You brought up one great point that I want to highlight because two great points I want to highlight. One is most people don't train hard enough, right? And it's a harsh reality to tell somebody like, hey, you're doing a lot of the right things. You just need to train harder to see better results because it's like they're training consistently. Their technique and range of motion are decent. Could they be improved? Sure. But like the fundamentals are there. They're doing sufficient volume. It's just like, man, you are like 8 reps shy away from actual failure. So we need to get pretty close to that if we want to stimulate muscle growth. The second point that I really wanted to highlight is like you're talking about these different facets of physical fitness, whether it's strength, whether it's muscle growth, whether it's reactivity and power. Yet all of those can be accomplished with fairly similar types of exercises as well, using weights and resistance, right? And I highlight that because so often I hear people say like, I'm lifting weights, but I'm not building muscle. And it's because the weights themselves are just a tool. Like
Right.
because you're lifting weights, it doesn't mean you're gonna build muscle. You need to use them in a way that's going to stimulate muscle growth. You can technically do cardio using weights, right? Like it's really the execution and the performance of how you use the tool that's going to dictate the outcome. And the third thing I really wanted to bring up, and it's more of a question just out of curiosity, you mentioned you like grouping all of the difficult activities or max effort activities, if I'm understanding you correctly, into one red day, maybe 2 red days on a given week, and then spreading it out with more medium type of intensity, whether it's more hypertrophy work or more upper body work versus lower body work. I'm curious how you develop that sort of philosophy. And I ask because I've always personally really enjoyed spreading it out evenly throughout the week, where my training sessions, I always start with something that is very strength focused, very high intensity, very close to a percentage relative to my 1RM. And then I will transition to, and I only do one exercise there, maybe 2, 3 sets max, maybe 4, depending on how I'm feeling that day. If I'm auto regulating, then I'll transition into usually a superset that's more hypertrophy focused. And then I'll transition towards more isolation or even isolateral work to work on mobility and imbalances and stuff like that. And at least for me, because psychologically, like thinking about deadlifting, then squatting, then doing something else. It's like, fuck, man, it's really hard in one day, right? Just wanted to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, and by the way, so for example, even when you do that submax day, it's still there's one main lift, if
Sure.
that makes sense, right? Like the rest is still supplement work and accessory work.
Okay.
But the point of it is like, so for example, right? Like let's say that we were going to go, you wouldn't usually go, hey, I'm going to do a trap bar deadlift on a submax day for a trip, 4 sets of 3, and then I'm also going to do a bench press for 4 sets of 3, right? I mean, look, is that a complete no? You could do that, but
Sure.
honestly, like that would usually be a little bit, too much. What would happen is that like on your let's say on your second day, I might do 4 sets of 3 on the bench press, and all the other stuff is going to be more like hypertrophy work, right? So again, there is so many ways that you can do it. that would like to stick within the principles. Because, for example, like for a lot of people, like imagine if athleticism is a priority, like athletes, to be honest with you, like it doesn't matter what they squat, bench, whatever, right? As if they can perform on the field, that's the most important thing. So in the off season, we might do dynamic effort day as first day of the week. Why? They're the freshest, and we're going to work the most on things like explosiveness and speed, and like if that's what they need, right? Like we're going to do that. For example, I'll give you another. Like there's so many different scenarios. I was the strength coach for the pro rugby team that was the national champs for a couple of years, right? They have a game on Saturday or Sunday. I mean, it's like a car wreck, right? What happens when their first training session when they come in? There's actually more upper body work because
Sure.
mentally they're like, oh yeah, man, we can clang and bang and get buff, like But imagine coming in from like that game, you're destroyed, and like, all right, guys, we're gonna safety bar squat for 3 sets of heavy of fives, right? Like, and then we're gonna mentally that's a mind fuck, right? So you have to also organize that, and think through how many days there are, how you're recovering from those days. There's a lot of factors. There really is, and I don't want to complicate it at all because the truth is, if look, you need 48 to 72 hours in between. That's why, like, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Honestly, a lot of times too, I'm gonna recover better from a like I might be a little bit more sore, by the way, from a day where I do more work on hypertrophy, but I'll still be recovered, right, for a session. But like true strength work, like more sets of close to your max output, faster sprints, bigger jumps, right? Like that stuff, like your nervous system will be cooked, right? So even what day you put where for this person matters. Now, look, if I zoom out a lot, I would say don't major in the minors, because if you're not consistently training 2 to 3 days a week and training pretty hard, all that shit doesn't matter, right? Those nuances matter more and more and more the more experience that you have, and like the more you've kind of achieved results, right? And look, there is a better way. Like I don't want to, but if you bring me a person and I'm like, hey, follow this plan. Now I know everything about your life, your goals, this, that, the other. Like I can get people significantly better results than if they're just kind of doing, like a random ass plan and they're working hard on it. Now, I will say this: best plan on the planet, done at 50, 60% intent and intensity versus a okay plan, maybe even a shitty plan done with gusto, all out, consistent hard effort, being really dialed in consistently for a year. That person that did a shittier plan will get better results, right? So there's just a truth to that. Ideally what you do is you combine both, like you combine intent and hard work with the right plan for you, right? That's obviously the best scenario, right? And the best and the right nutrition for you. And also, like, look, I always ask people, hey, you want to, people come in like in 16 weeks for this wedding, I want to be da-da-da, right? And I'm like, look, you can do this.
Yeah.
Like, and I draw a chart. I said, like, this is what it's going to require to get the results you're asking for. We can do them, but it's going to be 4 days a week of training with me. You're going to have to do cardio on these days. You're going to have to eat this way, you know, and it's like, and you're going to get results faster. Now you could go the longer route, and then we can train this much, do this, and based on what you told me, I think maybe this longer path will be better. It's like everything. My analogy of training is like GPS. Like you are here, Joey, like, and what is here for you? This is your strength level. This is your blood work. This is your mobility. This is your cardio. This, like, we assess and we test everything we need to. Like, this is your weight, your body fat percentage. Point A. Okay, cool. And this is your life. This is how much you work. This is so we know what's going on. Okay, what is point B? Where is it that you want to go? Right? And why? Like, why do well, I want to be this lean and I want to have this type of fitness and my VO2 max is this. And cool. All right. Now we have point A and point B on the GPS. Okay. Now, if you put point A and point B on a GPS and you go, it'll ask you shit like this. Do you want the fastest route? Do you want the scenic
Yeah.
route? This one has delays. That's the same way. I'm like, look, there's the fastest route, but the fastest route has a cost to it, and
Yeah.
sacrifices. Are you willing to make those? And if not, that's fine. I don't like, great. The scenic route, excellent. Let's go with the scenic route. It's going to take you a year or so to get there, but man, like, honestly, you'll be more sustainable with the changes that you made after that year. So, that's I think the best analogy when it comes to everybody's got their own GPS, and by the way, life happens, right? Like I can't tell you the amount of times that, I don't know, I had a back issue for, I mean, 3 months, maybe even 4 months, that some nerve stuff that flared up on me. And the plan that I had, on the GPS, it was like, road closed. And I had to kind of go back a little bit and reroute and find exercises that work for me and do PT and worked around it. And again, the point is that you always KMF, which is you always keep moving forward. You learn how to reroute. Again, this is why coaches and plans and communities and guidance is really, really helpful, because if you don't have the knowledge and experience and the wisdom to do it, like, man, it's really helpful to have somebody that can highlight that for you. But the big thing is like what we started with at the beginning, you know, longer runways. And I'll say now that I'm like 45, like, look, the other thing too, I think that is very helpful when somebody with experience can talked about, like, you can beat the muscles up a shit ton, right? But the joints only have so much that they can take,
Yeah.
right? And I talk to people that are in their 20s and sometimes in their 30s, and they're like, yeah, like I busted this, but I'm fine, and I'm like, well, yeah, right now, and but hey, when you're 50, you're gonna be like, fuck, because the thing is that, yeah, by the way, we have stem cells and we have some cool shit and peptides now, that, but like, I'm telling you, like, talk to the greatest powerlifters and see what's up, right? Like, now, I'm not telling you, look, I chased elite athleticism, and in some ways still do for my age, I guess, right? But like, there's a cost to these things, and you just have to weigh out the cost. And part of what I do, now is like, help people get really fucking good at what they do, like, meaning like physically, and with the minimal amount of cost, right, to their bodies. The meaning, like, hey, like, man, look, you sprint fast and you deadlift a lot, but man, when you get out of bed, like, your day is shit.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a win. For people, the win is like, I can do all these things and I'm pain free. Like, hey, I had joint pain, but now I don't. And I think that's another part, like, that sometimes people don't think about. And you only have, like, by the way, you do have a lot of mishaps. And again, genetically, some people have more, some people have less. But there's a point in time where it was like it was your last mess up, and then you need a joint replacement, and you need this and you need that. And so I think that having this longer term approach to training, where you do think about, like, these are these things I want to achieve now. Like, by the way, even with elite athletes, and I mean, I train people that, like, their sport is a car wreck. You know what I mean? Like, it's violent, man. Like, it's violent. And so even now, I think about what to do and how to train them so that it's like for long term health,
Yeah.
because peak performance is not healthy, right? Like, the heaviest deadlift in the world and the fastest sprint times, that and even like the most extreme conditioning stuff, is not healthy. And by the way, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, because if that's your mission, man, that's what you do. But for many of the people that we train, you always want to kind of work on making the downside the smallest possible, right? Do your best to keep those people healthy while having the highest performance. And if you've ever heard of this triangle, I think this is at least part of what I like to tell people is, like, most people want body composition changes, but they also want health and performance. And I think that holy trinity works together, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you look great but your performance sucks and you're not healthy, that's a loss. Like, if your performance is incredible but you don't look the way you want to look and you're not healthy, that's like, there's
Yeah.
a way to do all three, and you gotta, like, look at that and go, like, hey, let me kind of work on all three of these rather than just like one of them.
Yeah, dude, I love ending on that point because the injury prevention piece is so important. I'll share two quick points here, and then we could wrap this up. One is, you'd laugh at what I used to do when I first started training. I Not when I first started training, but when I first started getting more serious about training, I was going to a powerlifting gym, and for years, dude, I couldn't really progress my lower body lifts much, and so I just thought, more volume, more intensity. And my training session twice a week for like a good 3 years, and I couldn't figure out why I wasn't progressing and I kept getting injured, was a true, like, heavy 5x5 squat, a true heavy 5x5 deadlift. Then I had to do some hypertrophy work because that was not hypertrophy. So I would do 3 sets of hack squat in like the 8 to 10 rep range to failure. And then I would do some hamstring curls after that. I'd be in the gym for 2 hours, leave like barely able to walk. Every other month, like my back was hurting or my knee was fucked up, and I was like, what's going on? I need to go harder, dude. It's not fun.
Hey, but here's the crazy thing though. Like, I mean, you're telling man, if I showed you some of the stuff, you could probably go. I've been on YouTube for like 17 years. Go back and look at some of my stuff. I mean, we train like absolute animals, and the thing is, there's times where you can get away with that, right? Uh, you know, the thing is like, was it optimal? Probably not. We got some incredible results, but it's like, specific law of adaptation. But the truth is, that just doesn't work well, especially in short spurts. But it doesn't, and it can trick you because you
Yeah,
do that and you get results, right? And you're like, this works, and then you keep training that way, and then you run into a wall, right? And that becomes an issue. Um,
yeah,
and I mean, I had a story, an analogy, and it slipped my mind. But look, there's seasons of life, and if you've ever, there's a great book called "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." And I think that as you go through those seasons of life, meaning like, hey, you're all in, like the only thing you worry about is like getting fitter. Then you get into the season of life where work picks up. Like you're gonna have to. What got you here won't get you there, right? Then you
mm,
get a family and you're an entrepreneur, and what got you here won't get you there. It has to change. And we have to adhere to the principles. Now, the cool thing about it is, like, you've ever heard this poem, right? Methods are many, principles are few. Methods change, principles never do. But within those principles, there are a lot of, like, you could give me a program and I'd be like, damn, that's really good. Let me tell you mine. They'll look different, but majority of the principles will be in place,
yeah,
right? So I try not to bash stuff until I understand what people are doing and why they're doing it. But you do have to, like, I think, awareness precedes change, right? And assessment precedes awareness. How often are you assessing what you're doing? And that is a huge component of life, like your work, your financials, your training. People just keep going, 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 going. Like, I mean, I talk to folks like, yeah, I've been training like this for 7 years. Yeah, my results are sucking right now. Hey, when the last time you assessed it? I haven't. Like, I just keep doing what I've been doing. Like, it used to work, and it's like, well, yeah, listen, when you were 22, it used to work that, straight barbell bench press was great and your shoulders felt great. But it's like now you're 47, like, man, you load up the barbell bench press and like your shoulders are cranky for 5 days. Man, have a different bar, have a different angle. You don't like assess, right? And again, like if you don't like what you're seeing, you gotta assess because that's going to create the awareness that was going to precede change and have you have different inputs.
yeah, man. I love all those points. And to wrap it up with this, it's even when you talk about exercise selection, because sometimes it's not even just the exercise selection, but the execution, man. Because like now when I train, it's a full 180, Luka, to where, dude, I used to barbell squat and my knee was just like throbbing all the time and my hip was hurting, and it's just because like I would lift with ego and just try to lift as heavy as possible, and like my range of motion was always great because I always focus on training with maximal range of motion, but it wasn't controlled by any means, right? And talking about like even the health and mobility aspect, like personally, I like the philosophy of using strength training as a tool to improve mobility. Like for a dude who's 6'5", I'm very mobile, and I may not that I'm proud of it, but I don't really do much dedicated mobility work. I just train in a way that forces me to be more mobile. So like I squat ass to grass, slow eccentrics, and a 2-second pause pretty much on every rep. They look good. My bench press, dude, shoulder pain for fucking years until I just started like come down slow, all the way down, pause it, explode when you can't control it, rack the weight. And it's funny because like your ego definitely takes a hit. It's like, there's like 50 pounds less on the bar than what there used to be, but you get
We know
way
that.
better
That's
results
a
over.
toughie.
Sure.
That's a toughie, man.
Um,
I mean, like, yeah, and dude, I like. There's so many places I want to go with this because it's like we definitely got to do a second episode.
yes.
It's just I mean, when it comes to training, like, there's so many contexts and nuances and stuff that like I actually like to talk about because people find themselves in those scenarios, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, that was me, and I think that's where the learning happens. And that's why I love questions and I love Q&A stuff because it kind of sometimes brings out a thing you're not talking about, but you're like,
Yeah.
oh, let me show you a scenario. Let me tell you about a couple of different things, right? Like, um, yeah, like this is. I mean, I'm sure you noticed I get lit up about all of this stuff because this is my world, and I absolutely love this. I never get tired of this.
Yeah, dude. I again appreciate your time tremendously, Luca. We'll definitely schedule a V2 and talk a little bit more about this stuff. Because one thing that gets me fired up, man, is like when you hear somebody, and listen, obviously some people and some exercises just a bad fit. But oftentimes I hear, Luka, people say like, I can't squat because it's always messed up my knee. I can't bench because it's always messed up my shoulder. But then you look at how they're doing, and it's like, okay,
Yeah.
like,
It's not the
there's a
squat. It's
lot
the
we can
way
improve
you're
that's going to
doing the
reduce
squat.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And then it's like also, hey, like man, there's different, like we could do different squats.
yeah,
And
exactly.
so there's so much of that like some people's minds have been blown. That like there's different variations. They're like, holy shit, this is pain free, and I can push it. And if when you get somebody that pushes an exercise that they haven't pushed in a long time, that's where crazy gains happen in like 8 to 12 weeks. It's like holy shit, yeah, of course, because your brain's not going to allow you to produce force when there's restriction and pain, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, dude. Thank you so much for coming on. Do you mind sharing with the audience where they can find you, social media, website, all that good stuff? And of course, as always, guys, all the links to Luka's stuff will be down in the description as well.
awesome. The main places, I mean, for Instagram, at Luka Hocevar, so it's Lukahocevar. And then there's YouTube, the same thing, like a pretty big YouTube channel where I share just a ton of stuff. I got a podcast called the Vigor Life Podcast. And then my gym is vigorgroundfitness.com. And then I have educational resources on lukahocevar.com as well. So most of the stuff can be found through there. And hope you check it out. Like I actually answer DMs if anybody messages me like, hey, I listened to this pod and I got a question for you. It's me. It's not an AI. So feel free to reach out. And appreciate you having me on the show, man. Appreciate this, brother. It's great.
Dude, no, my pleasure. And for all of those of you that have tuned in this whole time, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate the support. If you know anybody who would benefit from this episode and you share with them, I would be really appreciative as well. Catch you guys in next week's episode. Peace.